Hello, my name is Joseph. I'm 78 years old, and I want to share with you some stories from my life that have taught me a lot about health. You know, as we get older, our body starts giving us signals, and we need to learn how to listen to it. I'll tell you how I learned this the hard way. The case of Mrs. Mary, my neighbor. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was 1998. I had just retired as a math teacher, and my neighbor, Mrs. Mary, would always come over for coffee with me and my wife, Betty, on Sunday afternoons. She was a very cheerful lady, one of those who always had a story to tell. One of those afternoons, Mrs. Mary started scratching a lot. At first, we thought it was because of the heat. You know how New York is in the summer, right? But she kept scratching week after week. "It's just a little itch," she'd say, applying her over-the-counter ointments. But I, having seen my own mother suffer from similar problems, started to get worried. Mrs. Mary was getting thinner and thinner, and that itch wouldn't go away. One day I gathered up the courage and said, "Mrs. Mary, you need to see a doctor." My mother had similar symptoms, and the sooner we find out what it is, the better. At first she resisted. You know how stubborn we old folks can be, right? But after much insistence from me and Betty, she went. And that's when we found out. It was lymphoma. Thank God she discovered it in time, got treatment, and today at 85 she's strong as an ox, still making her delicious pumpkin pies. This story taught me a lot. I learned that our body talks to us, but we need to be attentive to the signs. It's like when I taught math to my students. If you don't pay attention to the details, you end up getting the whole equation wrong. The itches that taught me about diabetes now, let me tell you a story about myself. In 2005, I started feeling a terrible itch in my armpits. At first, I thought it was because of the new deodorant I had bought at the corner store. I changed brands several times, but nothing helped. My daughter Marcy, who's a nurse, thank God I have a daughter in the healthcare field, started to suspect something. "Dad, have you been drinking a lot of water? Going to the bathroom a lot?" she asked one day. And when I stopped to think about it, it was true. I was drinking water like a camel in the desert. I went to get some tests done, and wouldn't you know it, she was right. Diabetes. That itching in my armpits was one of the first signs. If it wasn't for that, I might have taken longer to discover it. Nowadays, I control it with diet, exercise, and medication. I take my walk every morning in the park, meet my friends, and take the opportunity to tell these stories to anyone who wants to listen. The lessons I learned from my friends at the senior center. The story of Mr. Anthony and the itchy legs. You know, every Saturday morning I go to the senior center here in the neighborhood. It's a wonderful place where we play dominoes, chat, and exchange experiences. That's where I met Mr. Anthony, an 82-year-old gentleman who taught me a lot about health. Mr. Anthony was a retired bus driver and was always complaining about a terrible itch in his legs, especially below the knees. "It's because of the cold," he'd say. But we were in the middle of summer. His skin was so dry it looked like old newspaper. One day during our domino game, he started telling us that he had been feeling very tired, feeling cold even on hot days, and had gained weight without changing his diet. I, now more experienced after my diabetes case, said, "Buddy, this smells like a thyroid problem to me." At first he laughed, thinking I was trying to play doctor. But after so much insistence from me and Mrs. Lucy, our friend from the center who had gone through the same thing, he went to the doctor. And wouldn't you know it, I was right. It was hypothyroidism. Today he takes his medication regularly, and that itching in his legs has disappeared. The case of Mrs. Judy and the miracle cream. Oh, and let me tell you about Mrs. Judy. This story is too good. She also frequented the center. She was a very vain lady, always with her hair well done. One day she showed up all excited, saying she had discovered a miracle cream for itching that she bought from a door-to-door saleswoman. "It's natural," she'd say, "made with herbs from the Amazon." She applied the cream to an itch she had on her back. At first it seemed to get better, but after a week the poor thing showed up with her skin all red and irritated. She ended up in the emergency room. The doctor explained that she had a bad allergy because of the cream of unknown origin. That's when I learned not everything natural is safe. As I always tell my grandchildren, medicine and cream are like politics. You have to know the source. The tea afternoons and discoveries about food. At my house, every Thursday is tea and cake day. I gather my friends from the center and we talk about everything. It was during one of these afternoons that Mrs. Claire, our tea expert, she has a backyard full of herbs, taught us about the relationship between food and itching. "Did you know," she said while serving chamomile tea, "that certain foods can make itching worse?" And she started telling us how she discovered that every time she ate a lot of chocolate or very spicy food, her skin would get more irritated. This reminded me that after I started controlling my diabetes, cutting out sugar and fried foods, that itching in my armpits improved a lot. We started exchanging experiences and discovered that several of us had noticed the same thing. Diet makes all the difference. Joseph's Health Diary. After all these experiences, I started doing something I recommend to everyone: a health diary. It's a simple notebook, just like a student's, where I write down everything. When I have an itch, what I ate that day, what the weather was like, if I took all my medications. My granddaughter Maria, who's all modern, even wanted to teach me how to use an app on my phone for this, but I prefer my little notebook. The handwriting sometimes comes out shaky. Age doesn't forgive, but it helps a lot during medical appointments. The other day, I took my diary to my appointment with Dr. Paul, my doctor for 15 years, and he was impressed with the notes. "Mr. Joseph, you could teach my other patients," he said. I felt so proud, you know. The secrets I learned about different types of itching. The discovery of dry and wet itches. You know, over time we learned that not all itches are the same. It was during an appointment with Dr. Sandra, a dermatologist I met through my daughter Marcy, that I learned about the differences between dry and wet itches. And as I always tell my grandchildren, knowledge doesn't take up space. I'll tell you a funny story about this. In the water aerobics group, yes, I do water aerobics 3 times a week, very good for the joints. I met Mr. Sebastian, who was always complaining about a terrible itch. He applied so much cream that he looked like a piece of bread slathered with butter. "Mr. Sebastian," I said one day after class, "sometimes less is more." And I told him what I had learned from Dr. Sandra. I explained that there are 2 main types of itching. Dry, which is more common in us elderly folks because of the skin that gets drier with age, and wet, which can be a sign of something more serious happening inside the body. The winter that taught me about hydration. In 2018, we had a very harsh winter here in New York. My skin got so dry it looked like old tree bark. That's when my wife Betty had a brilliant idea. We started using a humidifier in the bedroom, one of those she got from the kids for Christmas. What a difference, my people. Not only did the itching improve, but even our sleep got better. Now every winter we turn on the device, and I joke saying we've become modern in our old age. Betty's medicinal garden. My Betty, may God always keep her in good spirits, started a medicinal garden in our backyard. She has chamomile, calendula, aloe vera. She learned in a course at the health clinic that certain plants can help calm the skin. Of course, we always consult the doctor before using anything, right? But that aloe vera gel she prepares, with Dr. Paul's blessing, is a beauty for dry itches. Even the neighbors come asking for it. The support group we created. One thing led to another, and before I knew it, our house had turned into a small meeting center for exchanging experiences about health. Every Sunday afternoon after Mass, we receive 8 or 10 friends to talk about our ailments and discoveries. Mrs. Zoe, for example, discovered that switching from regular soap to a glycerin one greatly improved her itching. Mr. Gerald learned that sleeping with cotton socks after applying cream to his feet helps maintain hydration throughout the night. Dr. Paul's lessons on prevention. During one of the consultations, Dr. Paul told me something I never forgot. "Mr. Joseph, preventing is like saving money. A little bit every day is worth more than a lot at once." And he's absolutely right. I started creating a skincare routine. Every morning after breakfast, I apply a moisturizing cream that the doctor prescribed. I drink plenty of water. I even have a special water bottle that my grandson decorated. I check if there's any different area on my skin. I write everything down in my little notebook, The Case of the Stubborn Neighbor. Oh, and I must tell you about Mr. Jack, my stubborn neighbor. He had a persistent itch in the, well, how can I say this? In the back area, you know? But he was too embarrassed to go to the doctor. "It'll pass," he'd say. But it didn't. After a lot of talking, I convinced him to go to the doctor by telling him about a cousin of mine who had a similar problem and, by not taking care of it, ended up having serious complications. When he finally went, he discovered it was hemorrhoids, something simple to treat at the beginning. Life lessons. How age makes us wiser. The knitting club and discoveries about allergies. My Betty participates in a knitting club on Tuesdays, and sometimes I stay there too, playing dominoes with the other ladies' husbands. It was on one of these afternoons that something interesting happened with Mrs. Claudia, the wife of my domino partner. She was knitting with a new, colourful wool when she started scratching non-stop. We soon discovered it was an allergy to synthetic wool. This reminded me of how much our body changes with age. When I was young, she said, I could use any type of wool. Now I have to pay attention even to this. Mr. Arnold's pharmacy. Mr. Arnold, the retired neighborhood pharmacist, always says that medicine is like shoes, it has to be tailor-made. He taught me a lot about how some ointments that work for some can irritate others' skin. I remember once when I had a terrible itch on my legs and ran to buy an ointment that had worked for my buddy Joaquin. Mr. Arnold stopped me right away. Hold on, Mr. Joseph. Let's first understand what kind of itch this is. That's when I learned about the importance of not using just any medication just because it worked for someone else. Everybody is different, as my doctor granddaughter says. The walking group and discoveries about sweat. Every morning at 6 a.m., I meet with a group of friends to walk in the park. We're about 10 seniors, all with their stories and experiences to share. It was during these walks that I learned about the relationship between exercise, sweat, and itching. Mr. Oscar, for example, discovered that after he started wearing shirts made of appropriate fabric for exercise, those that dry quickly, his back itches decreased a lot. Staying in sweat-soaked clothes is an invitation for problems, he always says. Grandma Betty's homemade recipes. My Betty started doing interesting work, collecting homemade recipes that really work to relieve itching, of course, always with the doctor's approval. She has a little notebook just for this with neat handwriting and everything. One of the most successful recipes is a cold chamomile compress. She boils the chamomile, lets it cool, puts it in the freezer for a bit, and then applies it with a clean gauze. It's a beauty for calming irritated skin. The day I learned about stress. I'll never forget the day I realized that stress can also cause itching. It was during the house renovation last year. Everything was a mess. Workers everywhere, dust, noise. Suddenly I started itching all over. At first I thought it was an allergy to the construction dust, but Dr. Sandra explained to me that stress can trigger skin reactions. The body says what the mouth sometimes doesn't, she said. After the renovation was over and life returned to normal, the itching decreased. Mrs. Carmen's yoga classes. One of the most recent discoveries was through Mrs. Carmen, who teaches yoga for seniors at the Neighborhood Association. She taught us breathing exercises that help relax and, consequently, reduce the urge to scratch. At first, I confess, I thought it was a bit strange. This is young people's stuff, I thought. But after I started practicing, I realized it really makes a difference. Now, every time I start to feel itchy, I first do the breathing exercises she taught. The itching calendar. An interesting thing I noticed and now write down in my little notebook is that itching changes according to the seasons. In winter, for example, the skin gets drier and the itch is different from the one that appears in summer, when we sweat more. I even made a little calendar marking the periods of the year when itching tends to get worse. This helps to prepare in advance, you know. In autumn, for example, I start to take extra care with hydration. Life and health lessons, what I've learned in recent years. The Gardeners Club and the discovery of plants that cause itching. You know, after I retired, I started participating in a gardening club here in the neighborhood. We're about 15 seniors who meet to exchange seedlings and knowledge about plants. That's where I learned an important lesson about itching caused by plants. Mr. Joaquin, who has the most beautiful garden on the street, had an experience with a plant called nettle. It felt like 1,000 ants were biting me, he would say. That's when our friend Mrs. Teresa, who was a biology teacher, taught us how to identify plants that can cause allergies. Now we even have an educational garden bed at the community center where we show children which plants they should avoid touching. As I always say, knowledge is like a plant. The more you cultivate it, the more it grows. The story of my cat, Whiskers. 3 years ago, my granddaughter gave me a cat as a present. At first, I was worried because I had heard that cat hair can cause allergies in older people, but Dr. Sandra taught me something interesting. Not every itch with animals is an allergy. I learned to brush Whiskers regularly, he loves it, and always keep the house clean. I also discovered that some itches that I thought were because of him were actually from the laundry detergent I used to wash clothes. The United Itchers WhatsApp group. My granddaughter Maria taught me how to use WhatsApp, and we created a group called United Itchers. It was Mr. Albert's idea. He has a sense of humor. There we exchanged tips and experiences on how to deal with different types of itching. One day Mrs. Lorna shared an interesting discovery. She noticed that after she stopped using very hot water in the shower, her itching improved significantly. Very hot water dries out the skin, she explained. Now we all take showers with warm water. Betty's cooking classes. My wife started giving healthy cooking classes to our friends at the senior center. She teaches recipes that help strengthen immunity and improve skin health. Health begins on the plate, she always says. And she teaches how to make juices with carrot, beet, and apple, which are great for the skin. We also learned about foods that can worsen itching, like very spicy or processed foods. The weather diary. I started to notice that the weather greatly influences itching. So, I created a weather diary where I write down what the weather is like and how my skin is. That's how I discovered that on very dry days I need to be even more careful with hydration. My grandson Peter, who is studying meteorology in college, got all excited about my diary. He even helped me organize the notes better and explained to me about the relationship between air humidity and skin health. The storytelling sessions. Every month I go to the children's hospital to tell stories to the hospitalized children. I started after I found out that many of them suffer from itching because of the treatments. I tell stories about Super Moisturizer and Captain Don't Scratch, characters I invented to teach in a fun way about how to take care of the skin. The nurses say the children are more excited to apply the creams after the stories. The Natural Remedies Notebook. Over time, I collected various natural recipes that help relieve itching. Everything noted down in a special notebook with Dr. Sandra's approval, of course. There are oatmeal compresses, chamomile tea for bathing, cucumber masks. The most popular is Grandma Betty's cream, which she makes with natural ingredients from the garden. Even the health clinic has asked for the recipe to pass on to other patients. Wisdom of the Years, Lessons on Health and Well-Being. The Mystery of Nocturnal. Itching. One thing that took me a while to understand was why itching got so much worse at night. It was at a meeting of our senior group that Mrs. Margaret, who worked as a nursing technician for 40 years, explained everything to us. At night, our body temperature changes, and the skin becomes more sensitive, she said. That's when we started exchanging experiences about how to sleep better. Mr. Frank discovered that cotton sheets make all the difference, and Mrs. Celia taught that changing pillowcases more frequently also helps. Now I have a routine before bed. I apply a light moisturizing cream, wear loose cotton clothes, and keep the bedroom well ventilated. As I say to my grandchildren, a good night's sleep is worth gold. The Natural Products Revolution. Around 2019, a real revolution started in our group. Mrs. April, who was always very into natural products, started teaching us about handmade soaps. She makes wonderful soaps with oatmeal, calendula, and chamomile. At first, I confess I was a bit skeptical. After all, I was used to my pharmacy soaps. But after I tried it, I never wanted another. It's like going back in time, I always say, remembering when my grandmother used to make soap at home. Except now we have scientific knowledge to do everything just right without harming the skin. The book club and health discoveries. On Wednesday afternoons, we have our book club. We started reading books about health and well-being, always exchanging experiences about what we learned. It was at one of these meetings that Mrs. Eunice shared her experience with dermatitis. She discovered that some synthetic fabrics made her itching much worse. After this conversation, several of us started paying more attention to clothing labels. The self-massage classes. The physiotherapist from the health clinic, Dr. Rachel, started giving self-massage classes to our group. She taught specific techniques to relieve itching without hurting the skin. Scratching is like getting into debt, she always says. It gives relief at the moment, but then it only gets worse. Now, when I feel itchy, I do the circular movements she taught, always very carefully. The Gratitude Journal. I started a new notebook which I call the Gratitude Journal. In it I write down every time I discover something new that helps with itching or when I manage to help someone with what I've learned. For example, last week I wrote how happy I was to be able to help Mrs. Zelda's son, who had a terrible itch due to work stress. I shared with him the breathing techniques I learned in yoga. The community garden. Our community garden has become a real therapy center. Besides the medicinal herbs we plant, the simple act of working with the soil already helps us relax. Mr. Gerald, who has arthritis in his hands, says that after he started working in the garden, his pain decreased. And Mrs. Connie swears that the mint tea she grows herself is better than any medicine for calming down. Family meetings. Every Sunday, my family gathers for lunch. That's when I take the opportunity to pass on to my children and grandchildren everything I learned during the week about health. My youngest granddaughter, Anna Claire, who's in high school, even did a science project on folk wisdom and health, using my stories as examples. She got top marks. Final reflections. The wisdom that comes with age. The Great Generational Meeting. Last year, we organized a special event at the community center, the Great Generational Meeting. The idea was to bring together young people and seniors to exchange knowledge about health and well-being. It was an incredible experience. The young people brought information about health apps and new research, while we, the more experienced ones, shared our wisdom accumulated over the years. My granddaughter Maria presented an app that helps remember medication schedules, and I taught my technique for making calendula ointment. "It's like a bridge over the river of time," said Mr. Albert, always poetic. And he's right. I saw young people fascinated by our homemade recipes, and seniors amazed by technology. It was there that I realized true wisdom lies in knowing how to unite the new with the old. The group's memory book, inspired by the success of the event, we decided to create a memory book for our group. Everyone contributed with a story, a recipe, or a piece of advice. I was responsible for writing about the different types of itching I learned to identify over the years. Mrs. Claudia wrote an entire chapter on the benefits of aloe vera, which she grows in her backyard. Mr. Frank shared his tips on exercises to improve circulation and prevent leg itching. It was exciting to see all our knowledge gathered in one place. The visit to the dermatologist recently, our entire group made a collective visit to Dr. Paul, the dermatologist. He was impressed with how much we had learned and how well we were taking care of our health. "You are living proof that age is not a limitation, but an opportunity to accumulate wisdom," he said. We left there feeling young again, full of energy and willingness to continue learning. Final reflections. Now at 78 years old, I look back and see how much I've learned. The itches, which were once just an annoyance, became teachers. Through them, I learned to listen to my body, respect its signals, and take better care of myself. I realized that health is not just the absence of disease, but a delicate balance between body and mind. The relaxation techniques I learned in yoga, the laughter with friends at the community center, the pleasure of cultivating medicinal herbs, all of this is part of a healthy life. And most importantly, I learned that it's never too late to learn. Each day is an opportunity to discover something new, to help someone with what we know, to make a difference in the world around us. Conclusion. My dear ones, if there's one lesson I'd like to leave you with, it's this. Value every experience, every challenge that life brings. Even a simple itch can become a great teacher if we're willing to learn from it. Take care of your health, listen to your elders, but also be open to the novelties that young people bring. True wisdom lies in finding the balance between the old and the new, between tradition and innovation. And always remember, age may bring some wrinkles to the face, but it also brings a treasure of experiences to the heart. Each day is a blessing, an opportunity to learn, to teach, and to make a difference in someone's life. Now, if you'll excuse me, it's time for my chamomile tea and to apply my homemade ointment before bed. After all, as I always say, a wise senior takes care of the body so that the mind stays young. Good night, everyone, and may we continue learning and sharing for many, many years to come.